Welcome to a little theory of mine. It all started when I noticed something weird or thought about something weird. Now, I was thinking about The Incredibles. You know, it was a pretty good movie, all things considered. I haven't seen but a few clips of the sequel, but I have seen enough of it to know kind of what goes on, of course. But I was thinking of something of the first movie. So, when they outlawed supers, that they were obviously outlawing the superheroes. Supers is just short for that. But what about the supervillains? Now, I can't recall any direct mention of supervillains in the original movie with supervillain powers, though there could be some, but they could also be more like Batman-style characters. So, but there surely must have been some supervillains. I like to try to think that humanity is better. There would be plenty of heroes, but I'm also well aware there would be plenty of people who use those powers for evil. I'm not stupid, and I don't think anyone else is either. Not even the original comic book writers are stupid enough to think that, oh yeah, everyone who gets powers is going to be a good guy. There are plenty of villains in comics. So, what happened to them? You think them are just going to be like, oh, well, they made supers illegal, so I guess I'm going to stop being evil now. No villain would do that. Sure, maybe someone like the Joker maybe would stop being the Joker if Batman were to die, or disappear or go into retirement. But you think someone like Mr. Freeze, Poison Ivy, Killer Croc, Bane, or most of his rogues gallery is going to stop simply because Batman stopped him? No. And that raises another question. How on earth, then if they wouldn't clearly stop, or at least most of them wouldn't stop just because heroes went away, then how the government or police deal with them? Because if they were dealing with them just fine, then they wouldn't have needed the supers. But presumably, since the supers were needed, then they couldn't deal with them very well. Or at the very least, not perfectly. So, how do they deal with them now? And that got me thinking about other weird things in the movies. Or the movie, or movies, or whatever you want to call it. Universe, setting, whatever. Is that another thing that almost bothers me is, how do a bunch of these supers who are under hero protection just go missing and the government doesn't notice? Yeah, people go missing all the time and all that, but there is a problem. Sure, they were probably taken away to the island, but the government is probably keeping tabs on the phone records and that kind of thing. Or at the very least would notice when they all start going away and then disappearing under a suspicious circumstance. Dude, anyone could piece that together. There's a lot of heroes that Sinestro killed, and the logic just kind of fall when you think about how this would at least be noticeable. Sure, they might not have cared about supers, but if the supers learned that the government wasn't trying to protect them, that would be bad. And they're all under a protection agency to keep them hidden, so I don't think the government would necessarily want them falling into enemy hands, potentially. And that just raises more questions when you think about it. Mainly, why would the government want to be keeping down supers during the Cold War? Really think about it. It's the Cold War. Everyone knows that the government all war was looking into all kinds of things. Anything to fight the Soviets. They spent years trying to figure out psychic powers, for crying out loud. If they had actual superheroes to work with, they'd be all over that. So, and then it got me thinking, this is also set in the Cold War, which is presumably still going on. So, why did they were okay with a missile rocket coming right into a major city and no kind of response? Think about it, we don't see much in the way of military or a counter nuke or them firing missiles at the Soviets. And this is during the Cold War. Just the Cuban Missile Crisis was over missiles being too close, let alone an actual rocket being fired. All of this doesn't make sense, because there's so much information they shouldn't know. And that got me thinking again, how does Sinestro know so much about, where to find Mr. Incredible and his wife, and, Frozen and all that, but not know about Mr. Incredible and his wife's kids? Think about it. How could you possibly hunt down these people and not see they have a family, or at least get a mention of it? Just the time it would probably take to confirm some of that would be difficult. And you would never figure out that they have 3 kids, or at least 1 or 2 kids. It's not like those kids are very secret. So how on earth would you know all this? If the information is selective, this add-up doesn't make sense, and all of it doesn't really add up. Where are the evil villains? Was the government willing to weaken itself during the Cold War? Why didn't the government do anything about Sinestro? And why did a missile was able to come this close to a city and no counter response? And on top of all that, how did Sinestro get his data? And then it clicked to me. It all made sense when I thought it, but I suggested it. Now, this is an actual response to one of my friends that I had when I was talking about this. My first suggested where all the supervillains go, so I'm clearly onto something. So, my theory, now I know there's some theories like it, but I don't think they go the way I'm suggesting it, is that the government was 100% aware about Sinestro, and Sinestro was working more or less for them, or at least giving them items, and the government's whole plan in the situation was to take control, using the supers. Now, I don't know if the entire government is in on it, because government conspiracies famously have a way of falling apart. I don't think it would be necessarily the president or something like that, just because of how office changes work. It's been like 20-odd something years between the end of the super era and the start of the first movie, so any kind of a major elected position would have shifted out by now, and it's very likely agendas would have changed. So I'm thinking it has to be some kind of unelected position, maybe a secret task force that was made during the super era or Cold War, something like that. The major gambit, at least my theory is that they didn't want a bunch of unregulated supers running around, but not because of any form of national safety, just because they were worried that they could overthrow them. Especially if they learn, and they want to get a weapon against the Soviets. So my theory is they stoked the fires of the superhuman, well, I don't remember what it's called, but I'm just going to call it the Superhuman Registration Act, because it's basically the same thing. Not really, but it's kind of close enough to work. And their whole game plan was to get the super so they can't do things on their own. Then you pick them off one by one. And I think, what happened to the supervillains? Easy. How many would the government be able to walk up to, say, someone like any of the more unscrupulous heroes and be like, hey, you work for us and we'll let you be a hero again? But they will be maybe a bit more lethal. I mean, after all, if you want to prove that the world is safe without supers, you need to eliminate the competition. And we're all forgetting one thing. The government in the Incredibles universe is capable of mind-wiping people. Now, how much, to what extent, is unknown. But here's the thing, that is powerful information. You could easily walk up to someone, try to recruit them, and then if they don't agree, knock them out so the conversation never happened to them. Or, if someone sees you with your now government-sponsored heroes killing someone, either kill them too, or just flash the memory away. And that's extremely powerful on a bargaining chip level. And my theory goes that originally they spent a good while killing off the supervillains and letting Sinestro and maybe themselves kill off the heroes they couldn't control or simply deemed as too dangerous or compromised. That's why they that's why they were willing to let people like Mr. Incredible go much longer. Is that they were somewhat more predictable in their ways. So they were seen as less of a target. Either they couldn't recruit them, but not so much ready to kill them. But they were willing to let go if it made Sinestro happy. And why were they willing to let a missile go straight to the capital? Because they knew what Sinestro was going to do. They knew what Sinestro was going to do, and they wanted him dead. Think about it. Sinestro, I believe that one of the people Sinestro was giving weapons to was the Americans, or at least that faction of it. Simply as a ploy, so they could fight the supers. But think about it. Once you have your own team of supers, the ability to make people forget and weapons to fight the supers, then you've basically done checkmate. And the only linchpin in this great conspiracy would be Sinestro, the only rogue person who would know anything. And oh look, he just happened to do something crazy, try to send a giant robot, and then he dies. Now, I don't think necessarily they staged the exact death, but I 100% agree they knew about what Sinestro's plans, and their whole gambit was that they could either get him locked up where he couldn't talk after the incident, or straight up kill him in some capacity, therefore removing the one linchpin that anyone knew. And why were they at least relatively willing to let the supers take over, but come back after that? Because once the super population has been decimated, thanks to both Sinestro and who knows what other hero and who knows what else they were doing, they have their own team of sponsored heroes, ways to make people forget, and the tech to presumably fight supers. Then why do they care if a few people go around gallivanting as heroes? Who cares at that point? They've won. Their mission statement, victory achieved, checkmate, they've won. And I think that's something that's though I have seen some theories about like the government being involved. I'm not saying I'm original here, but I don't think they play it to this level or this way. Now I've heard also theories, some other theories, and I'm not gonna once again. I'm not saying I'm original, but I think I have a different angle on this. Now that's just my theory. My theory is the government kind of planned all of this, or at least someone in the government. I don't know. Maybe they'll reuse that old character design. I don't know. But that's my theory, at least. And honestly, I could see that making a very interesting third Incredibles movie. Not exactly sure how you would tie it in. It could be kind of interesting plot, though. It's one of those theories I think that it doesn't necessarily need to be true. It doesn't necessarily need to be true to necessarily make the story make sense. Although, where the supervillain ones is a good question. You know what I mean? And that is a good question, honestly. But that's my theory, at least. Put down comments and see if you agree with me. I'm curious to see what you guys' thoughts are on this issue. Anyway, that's Will. See you later. Yeah. Hey, why don't you hit that sub button? You're gonna become a subscriber. Get to see my content quicker. Wouldn't that be nice? I bet so.